Dust rolled across the open prairie like a ghost, with nowhere left to go. The kind of dust that didn't rise in storms, but crept quiet and thick, as if mourning the silence of something long buried. Wind brushed the grass in waves, whispering things too old for any man to understand. And up on a slight rise, where the earth sloped like a tired shoulder, a wooden cabin stood, weathered, gray, and sunburned on the western side. No smoke came from its chimney, no welcome hung on its door, just the low hum of wind through dry nails and wood too tired to groan. Inside, the rancher sat hunched over a small table lit by a lantern the color of honey. His hands were strong, rough as bark, moving slow and deliberate as he worked the blade of his knife along the whetstone, not out of need, habit maybe, or memory, or the dull comfort of steel against stone. The flame cast shadows across the room, flickering outlines of books he'd never read. A rifle hung by the door, a coat folded in neatly for a man who claimed not to care. His dog lay by the hearth, one ear up, one down. Quiet watchers, both of them. From far off, the sound came. Not thunder, not wind, wood creaking, iron rattling. He stiffened, listened. A wagon. He stood, slow, pushed open the door, and there they were. 10 women riding through the dust like spirits that hadn't yet decided to be real. The wagon was old, tired, its canvas patched and sagging. 2 horses pulled it, ribs visible beneath the strain. The women walked beside or behind it. Their dresses carried the prairie's color now, tans, creams, reds like clay. Dust had taken them, hair tangled by the wind, eyes squinting toward the last light of the day. Hands that once held lace now gripping whatever they could carry. The youngest cradled a bundle of paper like it was something sacred. The rancher didn't move. Neither did his dog. The sun fell behind them in a blaze of gold and orange, painting halos over every broken hat and tired shoulder. He hated outsiders. He'd hated them for 20 years, long before the scar on his leg, long before the letters stopped coming, long before the woman with dark hair had left with nothing but a saddle bag and the promise of somewhere warmer. Now 10 women, none of whom he knew, were walking right up his road as if the world had no fences left. The rancher lived as a man lives after grief has eaten through his bones and spit out what's left, silent, dry, and full of caution. His land ran wide, all the way to the ridge where the cottonwoods leaned like old drunks in the wind. He had no family left, not the kind he'd speak of. A brother, once, who rode south and never came back, a father buried under a tree that no longer bloomed, and a wife, though he didn't say her name, who left after spring and never saw the next snow. He built his fences too tall for neighbors to wave over, too strong for cattle to break through. He didn't take to town unless the whiskey ran dry, and even then, he'd keep his hat low and his voice lower. People in town whispered about him, said he was cursed, said he'd gone half mad, said his land was haunted and so was he. He didn't care. Let them believe it. Kept the world away that way. So when the wagon came, and the women stepped down like shadows made flesh, he didn't move from the door, just watched. The leader of them, tall, thin, with hair pulled back in a silver braid, met his eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't plead. She simply nodded, like she knew how this might go. "We need water," she said. The wind took her voice and gave it back to him like a dare. "Just for the night," another added, younger, her voice softer. Her hands clutched a sack that looked heavier than her frame. "We'll move on come morning." The rancher looked past them. Their wagon held little more than blankets, pans, a few sacks of meal, a torn map tied to the seat. The women looked like they'd walked far, far enough to forget pride, but they hadn't lost their shape, still standing tall, still breathing. Slow, steady breaths, no tears, no begging. He said nothing, turned and walked back inside. The door didn't slam, it just shut like a sigh. He didn't draw the latch, but he didn't offer anything either. Through the cracked window, he watched them build a fire at the edge of his clearing. They moved with silence and rhythm, like people who practiced surviving. One woman pulled another's boots off and rubbed her feet. Another unwrapped a small tin and passed around dried apple slices. They shared without speaking. The firelight caught their faces, different shades, different ages, each shaped by a life he'd never know. His dog whined once. He reached for his rifle, not to use it, just to feel it in his hand. Steel, familiar, cold, but he didn't go outside. He watched. They sang, faintly, a song he didn't recognize, harmonies like thread weaving between pine needles and night. And then, laughter, not loud, not forced, just one soft ripple like a bell half-dash rung dot. It startled him. He hadn't heard laughter on his land in more than 10 winters. The rancher sat in his chair, lantern low now, dog at his feet. He tried not to think about the silver braid, or the girl with the sketchbook, or the way they hadn't flinched when he shut the door. He sharpened his knife again, steel against stone. Not for protection, for something else he couldn't name. Sleep came late, fitful, filled with half-dreams of firelight and the smell of bread that wasn't his. In the dark, he rose once, walked to the window. The camp was still, fire reduced to embers, figures wrapped in cloaks and quilts like petals closed for the night. He looked longer than he meant to, and left the window with his hand resting on the rifle. But the latch stayed off the door. Morning rose like a soft whisper, laying silver fog across the grass, wrapping fence posts in silk. The cabin's windows were damp, beads of condensation catching the dawn light like scattered pearls. The rancher rubbed the mist away with the back of his hand and saw what he hadn't expected, a small basket sitting on his porch, woven straw, inside, clean apples, notched and polished, and next to it, a coil of fence wire, newly mended. No note, no names. Just quiet offering. He opened the door, slow, the way he did everything. His dog pushed past his legs, nose twitching, in the cool air, then padded toward the ridge where the women had camped the night before. They were already moving. No one had waited for instruction. One woman stood brushing another's hair, long and sun-lightened, the strands moving like corn silk between her fingers. They laughed gently, not loudly, just enough for it to carry across the field like a soft bell. A third swept dust from the wagon bed, while two more dug a trench to drain rainwater from pooling. Near their canvas cover, the youngest sat on a log, sketchbook in her lap, lace tucked beneath her. She drew a nearby cactus with soft, serious eyes, flipping her pencil end for shading. Her lips pinched in focus. She didn't notice him watching. He stepped back inside before they could wave. He didn't like waving. He didn't like being seen. Later that morning, he saddled his horse for a ride out near the creek, where a portion of the fence had given under snow last winter. He didn't say a word to the women as he passed their camp, though a few lifted their heads. Still, his mind kept drifting to the apples, to the repaired wire, to the quiet way they occupied the space without demanding to be part of it. He rode hard for a while, needing the wind, needing the ache in his legs and the rhythm of hooves on dry earth. When he came back, the girl was sketching again. This time, the cabin. He didn't like that either. He didn't speak until the third day. The sun hung low, orange behind cotton clouds. He'd found one of the women near the creek, washing clothes in the slow-moving water. She didn't jump when he spoke, just looked up, her hands still working the fabric. That land, he said, past the hill, it's mine. She nodded, wiping her hands on her dress. No one crossed it, she said. Didn't plan to. Good, he muttered, more to the trees than to her. She picked up the bucket, nodded again, and started back toward camp. The dog trotted up then, tail up, tongue out, and one of the older women, round-shouldered but with hands still strong, reached down and touched his ear, softly, like she knew the dog better than most people. The rancher saw it from the porch. He didn't shout. He walked down, calm, deliberate, slapped her hand away. Don't, he said. She didn't look scared, just looked at him, long and steady, like a woman who'd raised children and buried half of them. He came to me, she said. He didn't answer. The dog sat down next to her again. He didn't call the dog back. The women didn't cross the creek again. But they didn't ask questions either. Didn't ask why the rancher carried so much silence like a second skin. Didn't ask why he never shared his name. That night, the sky cracked open. Lightning forked behind the hills. Thunder rolled across the prairie like angry drums. The wind picked up so fierce it tore the corner flap of their wagon tent clean off. He watched from the window, waited longer than he should have, then grabbed his coat. The barn door creaked open, and he stood there in the dark. You can sleep in here, he said. Just tonight. They didn't thank him, but they moved fast, gathering what they could, guiding each other through the rising dust. The older woman guided the youngest by the elbow, shielding her sketchbook with her coat. Before entering, two of them swept the barn floor with branches. Another wiped down the back stall with an old rag. One hung the lantern they had brought. They treated the space like borrowed prayer. In the morning, the storm had passed. The women left the barn the same way they'd entered it, with care. By noon, one of them had fixed a broken hinge on his gate. Another left a small bowl of cooked beans on his porch, still warm, covered with a cloth napkin, a note beneath it written in a careful hand, for strength. He found it after sunset, ate the beans cold, still tasted better than anything he'd had in weeks. He didn't write back, didn't say anything the next day, but when he noticed the wagon's tarp coming loose again in the wind, he walked down and fixed it himself, silent, didn't wait for anyone to see. That night, he sat by the fire with the dog curled at his feet. The lantern light flickered. His knife lay across the table, untouched. He stared at the door, then the window, and then something deeper, something harder to name. His hand drifted toward the folded cloth that had come with the beans, touched it once, let go. In the quiet, memory crept in, not sharp like it used to, but slow and heavy. A different night, a long time ago. His brother's face, laughing, slick with sweat, standing at the same door with a bottle in his hand and 3 men behind him. The promise of business, cattle, shared land, whiskey by the barrel. It ended in blood. The brother took the deed. The men took the horses. The rancher took the scar on his leg and the lesson that kindness costs more than bullets. He buried that brother's name under the cottonwood tree that used to flower pink each spring. Never watered it again and never opened the door again for a stranger. But that night, he dreamed. 10 pairs of shoes, worn, different sizes, lined neatly across his porch like an offering. They didn't ask to come in. They didn't knock, but they waited. He woke up before dawn, didn't feel angry, didn't feel much of anything. But when he stepped onto the porch, he didn't reach for the rifle. He just stood there, looking out across the prairie, and listened for the sound of 10 women breathing in the quiet distance. The morning the well went dry was colder than most. Frost etched the wagon wheels like veins of glass, and the rope that had once hung easily from the well pulley now lay snapped into, frayed at the middle, dropped into silence. The women stood around in quiet dismay, bundled in coats too thin for the wind. No panic, just the still disappointment of people used to things falling apart. They didn't ask him, didn't look toward the cabin. The rancher had been watching from the porch, hand around his coffee tin, steam curling against his jaw like breath too tired to speak. He saw the way they waited anyway, not for him, but for the sky to decide something different. By noon, without a word, he hauled his old yoke from the shed, slid the hooks into 2 iron buckets, and walked the half-mile to his own backup reserve tucked near the cottonwood grove. The one he built himself after the last freeze had split the first well stones. He made for trips, left the buckets beside their fire circle, where a kettle waited cold. Never spoke. The next evening, after sundown, he stepped out to find something waiting for him, a loaf of bread, fresh, still warm, cracked crust, dusted with flour. Next to it, folded linen, a stitched square of blue cotton with a pine tree embroidered into one corner, neat stitches, gentle hands, and just down the slope, near the fence line, someone sat on the bench he carved years ago and never used. One of them, her coat drawn tight, bonnet pulled low, but even from a distance he could tell she wasn't just resting, she was waiting. He didn't plan on going down, but somehow his boots moved before he told them not to. When he reached her, she looked up, not startled, not expectant, just present. "You have a good view from here," she said. He nodded, sat down beside her. The bench creaked, but they didn't speak for a while. The land was wide here. You could hear everything, the wind across bare branches, the shifting of the horses in the barn, the softened hail of winter coming too soon. "I used to live near a lake," she said, finally. "In the north, it was always cold, but never cruel. The kind of cold that asked you to sit with it, not hide from it." He didn't ask what happened to the lake, didn't ask who she lost. He just listened. That night, he put the bread in the center of his table, didn't eat it all at once. He made it last. The next morning, he found her sketchbook near the gate, left behind, forgotten maybe, tucked beneath a log where she'd sat earlier while 2 others had gathered dry kindling. He didn't mean to open it, but the wind had already caught the first page. It flapped like a silent request, and his fingers gave in. Charcoal lines, precise but gentle. Faces, scenes. His cabin, drawn from the side where the light hit just right. A horse grazing by the water trough. His dog, curled near the barn, ears folded back. And then him. Twice. Once standing by the gate, hat low, arms crossed, his usual posture. At once sitting on the porch steps, shoulders slumped, a look he didn't recognize, softer. Not kind exactly, but tired, real. She hadn't flattered him. She captured him, and somehow forgiven him in the same line. He shut the book, tucked it under his arm, walked it to their wagon. She was brushing the mare's coat. The animal's sides rose and fell like a breathing bellows. When she saw him, she didn't panic, just tilted her head. You left this. He held it out. Her fingers touched his. Not long, not careful, but enough. He didn't pull away first. That afternoon, the women helped him mend a piece of the barn siding that had blown loose in the storm. He hadn't asked. One by one, names started slipping into his ear. Lena, the nurse with the steady hands. Francine, the one with a scar on her cheek and a voice like cooled whiskey. May, too young to have seen what she had, but already older than most men he'd met. A teacher from Missouri, a widow from Georgia, a girl with no state left to claim. Not all names stuck, but some did. He remembered them the way he remembered the smell of pine before snow, quietly, without trying. When one of them asked if she could fix the hinge on the loft door, he only nodded. When another asked if they could tell a small patch near the shed for onions, he pointed to the shovel. He wasn't friendly, but he wasn't silent either. The dog had taken to sleeping between both camps, never choosing one side, only watching both. It felt like a kind of peace. On the fifth night, when the stars blanketed the sky like quilt patches stitched by wind, he sat out on the porch and found her, the artist, already. There. She held a tin mug. It smelled faintly of mint. He sat beside her, hands clasped. I used to think stars were just holes, he said after a long while. In the roof of heaven, letting light through. She turned to him, smiled. That's a beautiful kind of broken. He looked at her, at the lines time had drawn around her eyes. Not sadness, not age, just truth. I had a brother, he said. Tried to build a life here, said land was all that mattered. We lost more than we built. She didn't fill the silence, didn't try to fix it. Instead, she spoke softly of a story half told, of a woman who once ran a school for girls out west and sang lullabies to orphans. Before the flu took half the town. I don't know how it ends, she said. He nodded. Maybe that's the point. A moment passed, then two, and he stood, opened the door. There's stew, he said. Enough for some. She followed him and. No words for gratitude. No need. Inside, the cabin didn't feel smaller. It felt shared. The women came in small groups over the next week, never crowding, never pushing. They brought their own plates, their own bread, and when they left, the silence they left behind didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The wind came first. Hot, unwelcome, scented with dust that didn't belong to this land. By the time the sound of hooves carried up the ridge, the dog was already growling low in his throat. The rancher stepped outside, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd been chopping wood, thinking about planting squash. 3 riders crested the hill, slick coats, loud laughter. Not the kind of laughter that came from something honest, but the kind that leaned back in its saddle and waited to be feared. They didn't slow until they reached the gate. One man wore a brown hat curled sharp at the edges. Another had a scar that split his cheek like a dried river bed. The third, younger, but cruel-eyed, held a paper in his gloved hand. Well, look at this, the leader called. Didn't think we'd find them so far out. Lucky us. The rancher didn't respond, just stood still. The weight of the rifle slung across his forearm. We're looking for 10 women. The second man said, they're runaways. Belong to a man back east. Paid good money to ship them west. They didn't stay put. The word belong landed like a stone. They're here, ain't they? The third said, looking past the rancher, toward the barn. The rancher shifted, not shouting, just stepping forward, just enough so the barn disappeared behind his shoulder. They're not yours, he said. The man in the brown hat snorted. Got paperwork says otherwise. I've got land, the rancher replied, and I don't recall ever giving permission for strangers to cross it. The men laughed again, but it was thinner now. Measured. The dog barked once, sharp and quick, then settled at the rancher's feet. You gonna shoot us, old man? The younger one said. The rancher's hand didn't move, But his eyes said he could. He didn't aim. Not yet. Not unless they made him dot behind him. The barn doors creaked dot boots dot not running, not hiding. They came out slowly. One by one dot 10 of them dot dust. On their sleeves, coats pulled tight. Faces set dot no tears. No trembling. They didn't line up. They didn't huddle. They just stood, behind him, around him, like roots spreading through dirt that finally belonged to them. One woman stepped forward. "We don't belong to anyone," she said. Her voice was soft, but it cut the air like truth. The second woman, the one who drew, stepped beside the rancher. She didn't touch him, but he felt it. Felt the quiet press of presence that didn't ask for permission. The wind picked up. The men looked at each other. The scarred one muttered something, spat on the ground dot, then they turned. Without apology dot, without peace, they rode back down the hill. But not kindly. "You'll regret this," one called back. "I don't always ride slow." The rancher watched them disappear into the trees. Only after the sound of hoofs faded did he lower the rifle. The women didn't speak. Neither did he. But something had changed. That night, he boarded the windows, cut extra wood for the fire, showed them where the shells were kept, taught them how to load, how to breathe slow, how to not flinch when aiming. They didn't argue. They learned fast. Still, no one ran dot, no one packed the wagon. Instead, they stayed. They planted onions in a shallow bed behind the barn, hung blankets where the walls let in cold, and the rancher, quiet as always, began to dig a trench near the edge of the porch for tomatoes, for sunflowers, for something that would grow. He didn't call it a garden, not out loud, but in his head, he called it hope. The barn doors were fixed tighter now, the fences rebuilt stronger, but the gate stayed unlocked dot one morning. As frost lifted from the grass and sun melted into the edges of the land, the rancher stood at the edge of his porch with coffee in hand dot below him. Laughter, real laughter. Not the sharp kind, not the mocking kind dot, just the easy kind that came from living past fear. The artist woman was sketching by the fire pit. Lena taught Francine how to bake something new. The younger ones argued about where to put a bench. They were loud. They were everywhere dot, but it didn't bother him. He turned toward the door, ready to fetch more water dot stopped. There, lined up across the porch boards, muddy and scattered and beautifully ordinary, 10 pairs of boots, some worn to the heel, some patched. At the toe, one with a broken lace tied in a knot. They hadn't asked. They didn't need to. He smiled, not with his mouth, but with something deeper dot, because he no longer minded the knocking dot. He missed it, even when it didn't come. Any line spoken, softly to viewer. Sometimes home don't come with walls. Sometimes it walks in tired, asks for water, and stays long enough to plant flowers in the dust you forgot was soil.